Okay, let's talk a little bit about how do we respond to challenging behaviors in our students. Important to stay calm and control our own frustration. When we're working with students who are having behaviors that are challenging, it is very frustrating. Remember to use a quiet voice and avoid sarcasm. You or us as staff have the ability to be more flexible than our students do when they're upset, frustrated, or challenging. Challenging behaviors are part of normal childhood development. Perfect behavior is very unreasonable expectation. That's usually why when you work with students who have goals or point sheets, or maybe they have an IEP, that their goal is never set at 100%. It's usually set at something that we think is achievable, like 80%. It could be less than that depending on the student's baseline level, but let's say it's 80%. And when they reach that, then you bump it up to 85 or 90%. It's never set at 100% of the day there will be no blurting, or 100% of the time. None of us are able to achieve that level of behavior throughout our day. Behaviors are not threats to our competence as staff. They're just a function of that student's inability or difficulty to cope with the frustration at hand. So reminding ourselves of that is very important, because in the moment we feel that we're less competent, or we feel frustrated by behaviors that students have, especially if they have behavior that pops up often or escalates, because we want to be able to support that student and get back on track. Understand that challenging behaviors are temporary, and we will have students kind of ebb and flow. Students will have great days, great great weeks, and then they'll have periods of time where they're struggling for whatever reason that may be. We just need to work at supporting them. Tips for avoiding a power struggle. Pick your battles. Sometimes it's best just to ignore certain lower level behaviors. Ask yourself, what's the goal for right now? That might help guide how you respond to students' behaviors or arguments. Think about whether the student is already stressed, or whether their anxiety level is already heightened. If you think that they're already heightened, you might want to avoid pushing the student. But if you think that they're not too heightened or too far on kind of that anxiety or stress thermometer, think about if this student has been taught skills to cope, or you know that they have some coping skills that you can prompt them with, and then go ahead and prompt them to use their coping strategies or their coping skills, hoping that we can practice that in the moment and you can support them to use those coping skills. If you don't think that they have any coping skills, like they haven't mastered that, or they haven't been taught that, maybe it's a new student and you don't know what their coping mechanisms might be, you might avoid pressing the demand and giving it some wait time before you move on. This is a list of behavior that you might see in kind of that escalation, rumbling signs. You might see fidgeting and swearing, making noises, ripping paper. Might see facial expressions like grimacing. Might start to see refusal to cooperate, rapid movements, crying, tense muscles. Might hear some name calling. Voice volume might change in your student. Verbal threats. Students sometimes start tapping their foot when they're getting agitated. Other self-stimulatory behaviors. Lots of questioning. May try to leave the area and avoid the task at hand. Their facial expression can change. You might have they're getting a look on their face that you just know means they're getting upset or frustrated. So there's different phases. There's a little graph kind of at the bottom there of escalation where, students are, at their base level, they're at their calm, and then maybe there's a trigger, and then you see that agitation. So if you know what those triggers are, you can watch for those. And then the stage that we're at for escalation and rumbling signs is often that number 3 down there, that agitation piece. Identifying the cause. Sometimes we don't know what the cause is for our students to get escalated or agitated. But if you want to try to figure that out, look at your data. Hopefully you're taking data. And then think about some of these questions. What's new? Has anything changed? Was anything missing from the routine or from the task that you were trying to accomplish? What could have been missed or misunderstood in the situation? Was the instructional task, so if you're working on an academic task, was it understood? Was it clear to the student? Were they trying to do something that they didn't think they could do? Was there a communication problem? You can look at the environment that you were in. Was it a confusing environment, irritating, disrupting, or overwhelming setting? Boredom or just lack of stimulation. Does the student think the task that you guys were working on is very boring? Maybe it's something they have to do all the time and it's repetitive. Or is it something that can be fixed quickly or not? Some of those questions can help you pinpoint maybe ways to intervene in the future and avoid escalation or decrease it. So escalation, some tips and tricks on what to do and what not to do. If a student is getting escalated, you might move closer to the student so that you're available to assist the student, but still staying out of their personal bubble. Give the student an established signal. So if you have nonverbal signals with them or ways that you check in with them discreetly, you might want to do that. Try to diffuse any stress by doing their coping strategies, or if you see them getting escalated and they often take a break, suggesting or prompting them to take a break could be helpful. Telling the student what to do, so kind of directing them back to their schedule if they're not too far onto that escalation can be helpful or could be tried. Help the student solve the problem. So if they're frustrated about something that you think you could help them solve and you could help support them in and they'd be able to do it, that might be an approach you could take. You could modify the activity that you're working on by reducing the demands or incorporating their interest into that activity, or shortening the activity and then coming back to it later. Like, oh, let's just do one more and then we're going to take a break, or then it's going to be time for snack or something like that. You could redirect their focus to something else. You could prompt them or cue them to go working in a quiet area. Cue for those coping and relaxation strategies, or reinforce any effort or signs of self-control for them. Things to avoid doing: arguing about who's right or who's in control, talking a lot or lecturing, usually a lot of talking. If people are escalated, they have trouble processing that information. This is true even of adults, and so that might escalate them more. Do not threaten them with consequences. Try not to call attention to the behavior. Avoid sarcasm, as it's not always interpreted correctly. Don't get into the student's face. Remain out of that personal bubble, but close enough to provide the support that you need to based on your student's needs. Introducing new strategies that have not been taught or practiced. So if students are escalated, that's not when we're going to try to teach new math material. And bringing up unrelated events. Okay, let's define meltdown and shutdown. They look a little different, and our response to the two behaviors are different. So a meltdown is escalating negative emotional reaction. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response. So what our response as staff is to keep the student who's having a meltdown and any other people that are in that area or environment safe. So that might mean that we clear the room if we have a student who's in fight mode and they're throwing things and hitting or kicking. We might have a plan where the classroom or the students that are in that area go to a different classroom, or they go to the library with their teacher until we can have the student who's in meltdown mode calm down enough to then move to a different area. Make sure you're non-confrontational, because if we are confrontational, we are likely to escalate that meltdown. Use few words, so less talking. Follow the plan that you would have. Students who have meltdowns usually have a behavior plan. And if the student's a kindergartner or new to your building and you don't have a plan yet, you're going to want to get your team together to write a plan if you have a student starting to have meltdowns. Get help if needed. So if you need extra adults, make sure you make that phone call or you notify the classroom next to you that you need some more help in there. You can prompt the student for a break. Reinforce any self-control that you see from the student. So if the student shows signs where they're calming down, or if they would start to pick up. Sometimes kids can have a meltdown and then they'll start to pick up things that they knocked over, that kind of thing. Reinforce that by praising them, those kinds of things. So those are a few tips on how to handle a meltdown. Sometimes you have students that have more of shutdown behavior, and that's a lot of internalized behavior where students are freezing. They stop working. They won't move. They hide. They're unable to talk or won't respond to you. They have their head down and they withdraw into their own world. You can prompt the student to take a break, either verbally or with some type of visual cue that you might have. Often you are going to have to wait out a shutdown. You could, if they're willing to walk with you, go ahead and walk with no talking. So maybe you're walking the hallway with this student when they're in shutdown mode because they're willing to move, but maybe they're not willing to do any talking yet, or you're just going to a quieter space. Help the student just get through that moment of shutdown by being supportive, being there. Once they're out of that shutdown mode, then you can talk with them about, what happened, what they were upset about, and all of those questions to plan for next time to avoid it, that kind of behavior happening again. A lot of the strategies we talked about for a meltdown will also work for a shutdown. So if you have students that shut down, you might also have a behavior plan. You might also want to get another staff person so that if you need to go somewhere, maybe someone else is going to have to take over depending on how long the student is shut down for. So after there's been large behaviors like meltdowns or shutdown behavior, often students go into what is called more of a recovery stage. And what that looks like is maybe the student is exhausted. They are often a little more fragile where they're more likely to re-escalate when they're in that recovery period. Some students who have had like a meltdown or shutdown behavior, they're tired and they might fall asleep, especially younger students. They often will deny rage behavior or whatever their behavior was during that very heightened, escalated behaviors that they had before. So this isn't the time to probably talk through what happened. Depending on your students' communication and age, you might be able to have that conversation, but it's probably not happening until maybe the next day, maybe a few days later, and often will be done by the teacher, the principal, someone of that nature will talk through what happened, and then they might come up with a new plan of how we're going to respond to things or how we're going to try and decrease those behaviors from happening. Sometimes students will withdraw into like play behavior or kind of fantasy, thinking about other things. It's just a coping mechanism for them. Some students may apologize when they're in recovery stage. Some signals of stress may still be evident, so that you can still maybe tell that they are upset or frustrated. How do we respond, or what do we do? Allow the student time to rest if needed. Have them use those Relaxation strategies, if they have any of those things, quiet corners, if they like to look at books, if they utilize breathing exercises, any of those learned relaxation strategies, encourage the use of those. Redirect the student to the schedule of what's next if you think that they are calm enough to do the next activity, or if it's something that they can do maybe in a smaller setting and they enjoy that activity. Redirect them to a successful activity. If a student's had meltdown or shutdown behavior, I probably wouldn't redirect them to an activity that I know is very frustrating for them or very non-preferred, because I feel like they would be much more likely to re-escalate. Sometimes recovery stage takes a while, so you might have to modify kind of their schedule or their demands for a portion of the day or part of the day, depending on how long it takes the student you work with to kind of get out of that recovery stage. Some students, it's really brief and it's short, and some students, it might be much longer. Make sure you have a space for them to take that time to be in recovery stage so that they can get down to their baseline calm, hopefully. Ensure that activities are at or below their level. So you want to do things that are mastered, things that are easy for them to do, because they are probably tired and probably still heightened and stressed. Check to see if the student is ready to learn. So are they able to follow any directions from an adult? See if they're calm enough where you think they're going to be able to participate in some of those learning activities. All of these strategies are helping the student to get back to a teachable state. So it's not that we're trying to reward bad behavior, but we don't want to increase bad behavior. So we're trying to teach our student how to calm and regulate their body and their behaviors before we have them re-enter the same expectations that may have escalated them in the first place. So what do we do next? So after our students have had that meltdown, that shutdown behavior, those big emotional outbursts, what do we do after they have done that? They've gone through recovery. We're going to reevaluate and restructure as needed. We're going to gather the facts. We might teach the student coping and relaxation strategies. We might consider if we need to do an FBA, a functional behavior assessment. We need to establish trust and rapport with the student again, because sometimes that is damaged in the process of those behaviors. Develop or revise our positive behavior plan that maybe we already have in place. So maybe we learned something from this incident and we're like, oh, that didn't go so well. We've had a discussion and we're going to add something to that behavior plan or change something in there. We may need to do some reteaching, clarifying of expectations with the student. The student's team may do a collaboration or consult. They may talk to the special ed teacher, your school psychologist, your speech therapist, your occupational therapist. You may have a phone conversation with the parent. Sometimes you have a meeting. It all just depends on the situation or how often are you seeing those larger behaviors, those meltdown or shutdown behaviors. And then the other thing to do would be train all staff to respond to meltdowns and shutdowns according to that positive behavior plan. So if not everybody is following the same plan, that can make it much harder for the student to learn whatever that replacement behavior may be, or to utilize their coping strategies, all of those things. So you want to make sure that everybody is aware of the plan, is on the same page.